Welcome to Sean's Thoughts. You're here with me and this beautiful, beautiful display of moss that I just had to sit and do a recording. Actually, as you known, or as you may know, my voice has been under a lot of distress recently. Actually, I just recently found out that as of February 2nd, I believe it was, the Lionsgate phenomena happened. I don't really fully understand what Lionsgate is, yet I have known that twice a year, almost like clockwork, I would develop symptoms of, I don't know whether it was usually symptoms around nasal and congestion and other things. And anyways, so apparently we've just come out of the Lionsgate. And Lionsgate, I know during around this time, the veil, I guess, is thinner. I've heard a lot of different explanations for it. But anyways, so we've just successfully come out of it. And well, my voice is coming back to light. I can still feel a little bit of tenderness, we'll say. And so for the last couple of days, I've been reluctant to do as much of my creativity. Actually, I've honestly felt a little bit of my creativity has been siphoned away, and I feel that definitely coming back to me as I record right now under this beautiful, beautiful, oh my gosh, like I'm definitely gonna turn this into a do nothing, do no thing video. I've actually been out with my drone and I've been filming all these different unique perspectives. As you know, I like to see the world from a different perspective, and I believe that this is vitally important to our coming years that we're going to experience, because the world was considerably different than we'd ever imagined it to be. And actually, recently I found out that the Epstein files, which were, well, in the news media an awful lot, being used for their different reasons of convincing people to fundraise and such. Well, anyways, it seems that the Epstein files released a lot more names, or perhaps the whole list of names. And well, I see that as a major turning point in Earth, in our civilization as a planet, because those files will definitely move through the filters and people will start to discover that a lot of things that were being said about what the true nature of the world was in fact truth, regardless of whether or not it's those particular files or if it's essentially different things that resolve or come from that. So anyways, that's been the last 7 days of me limiting myself from recording, and yet I continually choose to create because I know that creating is an effective way for us to rid ourselves of this matrix and of these overlays and all that other lovely stuff that I often talk about. So, how are you doing today? I hope that you are feeling amazing. I hope that you are creating so many different things. See, creating, as I've mentioned, is very important. See, taking those times to create definitely empower oneself, not only to add more to this world, but as I've said in one of my last videos, it also gives the Matrix more things to have to keep track of. And the more that we can give it to keep track of, well, then they don't necessarily can't as control us as much as they would like to. In fact, when I was taking my trip across Canada, I actually purchased my drone right before I left, and that was almost 2 years ago or 18 months ago. And well, when I got on the road, I didn't actually use the drone at all. Yet I was fully aware that the drone itself, it had a GPS locator built into it. So if someone was perhaps tracking my drone or perhaps following me, they would see my drone in the back of my car going so many places across Canada and never essentially stopping until the moment that I wanted to stop in. So if you're listening and you were watching while I was doing that, big laugh for you. Anyways, so thank you for joining me with this beautiful moss right now and all these thoughts that I have. And well, the one thought that I actually really wanted to talk about was the dissolving of relationships. I've had this in my mind for a little bit to speak on this, and yet I think it's very, very important. See, in order to create a new earth, and I don't necessarily mean create a new earth, I've spoken before about how new earth seems to be, or from my understanding is, it's already all around us. And it's our own personal limitations that essentially stop us from being able to see that overlay. I recently did a video and I will link it right up there in the top right now. And I definitely encourage you to go watch it right now. It's only 13 seconds long and you can come back to this video right after. But anyways, what this video depicts is it depicts a normal location where I sat myself and recorded one of my videos. And then I used a AI tool in order to overlay that space. So you go from the space looking one way and then there's an overlay there. And this is a really good demonstration or example of how our world was actually impacted. It was impacted by a series of overlays. And I say series as many, many overlays. Overlays for everything from time to aging to symptoms to whatever it is. They would overlay these situations and sometimes even buildings and people into our world, and they would seamlessly integrate, and we would have nothing to realize anything was different. So anyways, the reason why I mention this is because this type of understanding is coming through and our world is dramatically shifting. People are waking up to realize that so many different systems and structures in our world were fabricated. They weren't real. And when I mean weren't real, I don't mean that they didn't exist in our reality, because some of these overlays, you could touch them, you could kick them, you could hug them, you could, and I'm meaning people too, you could interact. And yet they weren't the same as you and I. It wasn't organic base reality. And I'm not necessarily saying that we're even in organic base reality right now. But with the overlays and the understanding of our world being considerably different than we ever imagined, well, it leads us to then try to understand why what happened in our lives happened. And as I mentioned before, what I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about, well, our relationships. Why so many relationships seem to have had to end over the course of the last few years. See, when we reached the 2020 mark, we had reached a pivotal point in our existence, you can say. Throughout our lifetimes, me, myself, and I, as well as many, many other people, we took on coping mechanisms. We took on essentially a lot of different strategies in order to cope with the world that was happening. We dealt with the lesser of two evils. We allowed certain things that we weren't happy or essentially that made us unhappy, not necessarily made us unhappy, but we allowed things in our lives, people in our lives, for example, because that's the way that society had taught us. Society had taught us that part of life is sacrifice, part of life is essentially making choices, and when you've made those choices, push through as hard as you can until you succeed. And yet what I discovered was oftentimes we make choices and we do things because perhaps in that moment there's an experience there to be had, and yet it doesn't mean that the rest of our life has to be built around those choices. And relationships, our relationships, were one of those things that, you know, we believed that because we had an agreement to be married, for example, whether it was through the courts or whether it was through governmental agreement, like walking into an office and saying, I want to marry this person, and signing your signature and paying some money, and all of a sudden you're married so that there could be a government contract created. Well, a lot of these relationships that we exist in, whether it was marriage relationships, even a lot of times through people I've heard that have children that have perhaps are a little older now, and they definitely have their own thoughts and their own understanding of life. Well, a lot of those relationships became tumultuous. I think I mispronounced that word, but nonetheless, they became challenging People started to realize I no longer want to cope. I no longer want this half life. I know something is bigger and better out there, and I want to be a part of that. And so, what's happened over the course of the last 5 years, especially, is a lot of relationships fell apart. A lot of people opened their eyes and realized, no, this isn't the person. They, of course, the coming to this understanding wasn't always coming from the same direction. Some people realize I'm happier with something else or someone else, or I'm happier by myself, or I just want to be happy. And where am I happiest? And then going out and finding that. We've all had our own different journeys in order to get to a place where we were more content, more satisfied, more happy, more aligned with the world that we were wanting to be a part of. Realizing that the world we were in with the relationships we did have no longer satisfied that ability to just exist, that we wanted to flourish and to live. One of the most awesome words I heard was the word thrive. We no longer survive, we thrive. Meaning the things that come into our lives, we accept them, we receive them, we acknowledge them with gratitude, whether they're obstacles or limitations, which are essentially opportunities for us to get stronger and to build. And so, what I experienced, even with my own personal eyes, was in my son's school, I noticed a lot of the mothers and fathers were separating. Me, myself, in 2022, I guess it was, 2023, I separated from my wife. Actually, she separated from me. She was the one who was stronger. I was the one who was trying to still hold on, trying to make it work. No matter what type of sacrifice that I did, I did a lot of them, it just didn't seem to work. Things didn't seem to align, to resonate, and there was always some sort of challenge that I was overcoming. And so finally, at the end, it was her being strong enough to break away that allowed me to essentially move out on my own and go for my own course. And for those first couple months, I definitely did drive around my province so much, and I saw so many beautiful things, and I met so many different people, not necessarily best friends type of people, but I examined and I watched people from afar as I moved about myself, going from Hope and northern parts of British Columbia and over to Vancouver Island. And I did a lot of traveling, but it definitely helped me see that there was an entire world out there of different experiences. And so I think that this is one of the experiences that many people did go through, and it can seem challenging, especially because, things are changing, and the Matrix, well, they taught us that change is something that we should resist, because the Matrix wanted us and almost demanded us that we stayed in a routine, almost like a everyday same type of routine. Yes, they gave us Saturday and Sunday off, and yet Sunday wasn't really a day off, because then they forced people to meet at their houses for their religious practices and volunteer work. Anyways, so why all this resonates or revolves around relationships is because in order to build up a new perspective, maybe, it's that the old structures had to come down. Those coping mechanisms, as I've mentioned before, they had to be relieved, that we had to remove them, realize that our value was worth so much more than dealing with those coping mechanisms, and that we don't necessarily need to cope any longer. I believe humanity is shifting into a time and a world and a life and an existence where we flourish as Homo sapiens, that we thrive, that we build and we create as God intended us to, and that what we're going through and what we've been through for the last 3 or 4 years is essentially a massive shakeup. it's kind of similar to what's happening on the earth itself with all of the natural events, we'll call them. The earthquakes and the volcanoes and the tsunamis and the storms. The earth itself is going through an evolutionary phase of its existence, and we are just like the earth. We are a smaller part of it. And that we ourselves are also going through those climatic shifts in our relationships, and where we were perhaps restricting ourselves due to trying to get the most balance we could while maintaining that relationship, we are now learning that it's time to break free of the old. There's a phrase in Chinese that says, "Jiu de bu chu, xin de bu lai." And what that means is if the old don't go, the new don't come. And in a sense, that's 100% accurate. We can't step into the station of now when we are being tethered to the past by so many different tethers, traumas, and emotional bindings, that we must let that past go, that we must open up our consciousness and be ready for new changes. And that, of course, means new relationships. It also means changing the dynamics of the relationships that we exist in now. And for those people in our lives who are belittling us or demeaning us, or they have narcissistic energies attaching to them, and they don't put out what you're putting out, means if you're putting out love and they're putting out non-love, then it's about time that we shake off the old and we step into the new. So I hope you enjoyed this moss beautiful sun. I will definitely be having an awful lot of videos coming up. I'm really enjoying capturing new perspectives with my drone. And yeah, if you have any thoughts or something to add to the conversation, I highly encourage you to drop something in the comments. The more people that comment, the more I can connect, that the ripple will go through from me to you, maybe back to me, and then together we'll ripple it out to the rest of the world, because the world is changing. And in order for us to perhaps be all we can be, another phrase taken away by someone or other. Anyways, the more that we can all be is to come together as a collective and create. And even if you're just creating a poem that you wrote by the side of the river and no one else other than you, the birds, the trees, the fairies, perhaps the Sasquatch, the Matrix itself, maybe, there was a lot of things listening, even if you thought no one heard your poem. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me, and I'm gonna get to walking home and enjoy the rest of this day. Thank you so much. And I see one person popped on and off. Thank you for even your presence of a few seconds. I love you so much, and I look forward to meeting you all one day, perhaps at a conference, which my Patreon account will perhaps fund the whole entire thing for every like-minded person to come meet me. We'll see what happens. If this resonates with you, definitely I consider looking at, or you should consider, or could you consider, however it is you like, taking a look at my Patreon. The link is in the description, I guess, on YouTube, or the address is in Rumble. But anyways, I have a lot of other photographs that I'll put there as well as everywhere else. Thank you for sharing your time with me, and have a wonderful day.